Today's COVID update is brought to you by Fulltech Systems, your technology center, where you'll come for the price but stay for the service.
And we're back, and this is our COVID-19 update for this morning, where we take a look at the development of COVID-19 vaccines and what it means for us in this region. So we're joined by representatives of PAHO WHO. We have Dr. Noreen Jack, who is the PAHO WHO representative in Belize, and we have Dr. Edwin Bolastig, who is the Health Systems and Service Advisor for PAHO Belize. Good morning, and thank you for joining us.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, it is definitely a timely conversation for us to take a look at the regional perspective when it comes to vaccine progress and development. But before we get to that, let's just start off by helping everyone understand how PAHO plays a supportive role in Belize through the pandemic.
Okay. So I begin, and Edwin can continue, but PAHO, and it's not only Belize, but throughout the Americas, PAHO has been supporting countries in many ways. One of the things that we have been doing quite a lot of is procurement, getting items, PPEs, some of the items that have been difficult to get initially, the test kits, and presently the rapid antigen test kits. Otherwise, we have also been providing support related to guidance. This was a new disease, so both WHO and PAHO has been providing guidance based on the knowledge that became available. And as the knowledge becomes updated, again, we update these guidelines. We have also provided a lot of support related to capacity building. Again, to build the capacity of healthcare workers in many, many areas. So there are so many areas, and specifically in Belize, a lot of we've done related to, as I said, the procurement, but also the testing, to enable the testing, to test both by PCR as well as by the new rapid antigen. And I'll stop a bit at this time and ask Edwin to add his piece, because there's also related to health systems, some of the work that we do.
Thank you, Dr. Jack, and thank you, Marlene. Good morning to all our viewers, and happy to be here in this segment this morning. Just to add to what Dr. Jack would have mentioned already, I also would like to let you know as well that PAHO WHO has been doing a lot of work in terms of strengthening the health system, so that it's not just during the time of COVID, that we're really trying hard to help build the system, but we're using the pandemic as a vehicle in which we could strengthen our systems. So one of the areas wherein we're helping the country is in preparedness and the readiness of the health facilities. For example, we've done readiness assessments at the KHMH, and we've done twice, and we've been checking on them on their progress, and we've seen how they have really tried to reorganize different areas of the hospital to be able to cope with the surge. And also we've been looking at the various primary care facilities and other lower level hospital type facilities in terms of their readiness, including the quarantine areas. When it comes to helping the KHMH COVID unit, we have donated one digital portable X-ray, and also at this time 3 patient ventilators already. There will be more coming up in order to beef up their capacity, but we will be updating you as they arrive in the country. So let me stop there as well and open the floor for any further questions. Thank you.
All right, so we've been following the progress of the race to find a vaccine, if I can use that expression, because you have different companies within the scope of big pharma that are trying to find the most effective means of treating with COVID-19. Insofar as the rollout in this part of the world, in our small little Caribbean region, what can we expect as developing countries insofar as perhaps who the priority will be placed on, and how at some point will we receive the vaccine and how it will be launched?
Okay, I think we need to begin a little broader and identify what's happening globally, because that forms the part of the discussion.
Yeah.
So at the global level, and spearheaded by WHO, but along with many partners, from April 2020, there is something called a global health consortium called the International, it's an international consortium, but it's called the ACT Accelerator. And it is for both to stimulate the development as well as the distribution of all the items that will come available as part of COVID. So it includes the various test kits, include new therapeutics or medicines, and include the vaccines. So that's where we need to start. And therefore, within that consortium, there's an element called the COVAX facility. The COVAX facility hopes to deliver 2 billion doses of vaccines by the end of 2021. It also is being developed for fair allocation and distribution of the vaccine throughout the world. Currently, 187 countries are part of that consortium, have committed to be part of that consortium. And in our region, 33 of the 35 member states have. So what it means, it is that it will provide for 20% of vaccines as it become available in a first phase. A first phase, so that would look at the persons who may be the most vulnerable as well as healthcare workers. So that's the part of it in terms, so once the countries are part of that, they have access to vaccines. Now there's continuous negotiation related to with companies as part of that consortium. You know there'll be competition, and you have heard of the 3 vaccines that have progressed, and that would include a number of and I always hesitate to say more developed countries will identify their populations as first. This has happened in the past with many vaccines, and this is what we're trying to prevent through this COVAX facility. So this is a beginning. I know we have some more to discuss, but I'll stop at this point to hear.
Yes, because I did want to bring some additional clarity to specifically the payment process. So COVAX facility, as you noted, it's how many countries as of today?
33.
187.
187. So, and you have large countries like the United States and Russia that have not signed on to the COVAX facility. But these countries come together and they're pooling funds. Can you explain it to us further how that works and whether or not that facility has met its target for the amount of money it needs to purchase vaccines globally?
Okay, so there was a first, which countries had to sign on, a first phase or step, maybe I should say, that in October, where countries had to commit by October and pay, let's call it a down payment, but a payment that contributes to a pre-financing.
Yeah.
So this would encourage the negotiation, because you do need to have money to obtain the funds, and it accounted for about 20% of the vaccines for that population. So, however, there is a gap in funding, and so there's a continuous need for that, as well as there are some countries that will not have to pay at all. They are sister countries, and in our region of the Americas, there are 8 of them, but globally, there are about 90 countries where funding is being secured to help those countries that haven't got the capacity to pay themselves. But there is a gap in funding at this point in time.
Yeah. So when you look at the facility, how it's been working, is it that this pool of resources from all these countries, a pool of financial resources from all these countries, is then used to pre-order vaccines from specific companies. Is that correct?
Yes, in part that is, but there's a continue. So at this point in time, we have no known vaccine.
Yes.
So that's the beginning. That's the beginning of.
So you have to
issue.
pre-order from the ones that seem most beneficial to us, and I mean, what are the criteria?
No. So it is even more difficult than that, because you don't have, because you have right now in the world about almost 200 vaccines in
development.
In development.
Yeah.
You have about 45 in clinical trials in humans, and you have, so there are with different companies. So there's a negotiation. You are not sure which vaccine you're going to be working with, we will have, or which set of vaccines. And the vaccines may have different characteristics, and therefore it's not clear at this time. But it is this negotiation, it allows for this negotiation that countries who may not have been able to purchase the vaccines by themselves or access them have the possibility through this consortium to do so. So it is difficult, and it changes almost every day. The information changes every day.
I made a note of saying earlier the countries that have not signed on, and it's really focusing, I think, on the weakest part, because so many countries have. But it does have a critical part in this conversation, because some countries, those who don't sign on to the vaccine, are well within their rights, and correct me if I'm wrong, to pre-order vaccines for their entire population before even considering being a part of the facility that will allow the developing countries or the poorer countries to get access to these vaccines. Do you want to put that in context for me, if I got it right?
Yes, you got it right, but I'll give Edwin, if you want to respond to that, and if I can always follow up with it as well.
Yes, thank you for that question. It's not an easy question to answer, but we'll try our best.
Yes.
What we're calling on is solidarity among countries, so that those countries that are producing vaccines will share it to the rest of the world. So while they take care of their own citizens, which is natural, of course, it's also important to take into consideration the whole notion of solidarity and fair allocation as well, because the protecting our countries also means protecting our borders, because we live in a highly globalized world, and we know that it is a pandemic and everyone is affected, and whatever trends we may be seeing in one country certainly affects the others. So even if we try to control the pandemic, the transmission of the virus in one country, for as long as there's continued transmission in other places and we're not able to control it, then we have not totally controlled the pandemic. So it's very important to have solidarity in mind and fair allocation, particularly those who are less able to afford these vaccines.
Now, what's the commitment from the companies who develop the vaccines? Because some are, I guess, a bit more geared towards looking at the global context, and some are kind of just looking at their production. I read an article, for example, that places like Canada have beyond 100% coverage in pre-orders alone. So when a company, if it's one of the three that are commonly discussed, does in fact get their vaccine approved and rolled out, I mean, to be able to provide for one entire country will mean that there's less for the rest of the world. So what's the commitment from the company's standpoints? Are there any that are saying we are going to commit some of our production at first instance to the global community?
Okay, so at this, I would call it still an early stage. There are about 9 companies that are in negotiation with the COVAX facility, and there are additional 9 being pursued. So in terms of vaccines, so it is not constant. At this point in time, it's difficult to say this one will provide for this person, and this one is committed. But this continuous negotiation and using the principles of solidarity, as Edwin mentioned, and pay allocation, some are. And once you have the funds available, you can purchase through that facility again. So this is happening. But something that you had begun earlier, the COVAX facility, in some instances, some countries will go back with bilateral arrangements. We need to acknowledge that can happen as well. So that may be happening.
What does that
mean? That some countries will collaborate directly with manufacturers themselves.
Yeah.
And that is real. That is in the
they have.
Yes.
The wealthy countries, Canada, the European Union, India, United States.
But the European Union is also part of the COVAX facility.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. You do have. So that does not allow, you can be both in the COVAX and you can be negotiating on your own. But the issue here is that we are trying as much as possible for persons to be part of the COVAX facility, because it allows the prices to be maintained, because outside of that, the prices can increase. And of course, the access by some and some would not have. So it's a pull and tug kind of thing that is back and forth, and it is not constant.
It's a very
what I would want for you to perhaps contextualize for me is when you look at small countries such as Belize that are already economically ravaged by COVID-19, and the fact that we will have to purchase or find a way of accessing the vaccine. What does that mean for our small countries?
Okay, so as I've gone, there are some countries, some countries that are part of the assisted countries. There are about 8 of them. I will not name them. And there are some that have to purchase to provide the commitment. And we have, as I said, a number of them. And in fact, in our Caribbean, all of them have committed to the down payment. One of the other things that have been happening in terms of support is the support through various banks, international financing agents, instruments, as well as the European Union have been supporting CARFA to support some of the countries of the Caribbean to provide that initial payment for that 20% of the population. So but that is like the beginning, and it will continue, because when the vaccines become available in 2021, there will need to be further payment. And this is also areas of support and part of what PAHO is doing in the Caribbean in terms of providing some the negotiation, and not only the Caribbean, but the Americas. I need to speak wider than just the Caribbean.
Dr. Jack?
Yes, Edwin. I think Edwin has to cut.
Right. If I may add as well, one of the existing mechanisms of PAHO is what we call the PAHO revolving fund, which is a full procurement mechanism that is also doing the negotiations, so that it pulls together the demand in the region, and so that even the smaller countries have a leverage, in terms of negotiating for those prices and for the distribution to these countries, so that the demand across the Americas is actually pulled within the PAHO revolving fund, and that is an existing mechanism actually for purchasing vaccines for the region, which is also being used to purchase the COVID-19 vaccines. And so that helps in terms of being able to have that kind of pooled procurement mechanism, and also the negotiating power to be able to bring down the prices and ensure availability of these medicines, because PAHO revolving fund is also involved in terms of the distribution of these medicines throughout the Americas. So just to add to that, that's the form of technical cooperation support that's also being provided by PAHO in the region.
So, I know you're both aware that we get a lot of our international news from US media. And so when we see what's happening there and the conversations that are starting with the rollout of their vaccine, I think very often there's an assumption that that's kind of like the global perspective. But in fact, vaccines that will be acquired through the COVAX facility, Belize will get its vaccines most likely through the COVAX facility. They have an additional step of being WHO approved. Do you want to tell us about that process?
Okay, I think Edwin, I'll ask Edwin to respond to that.
Okay.
Yes, thank you that's a very good question. Before any vaccine would be accepted through the revolving fund, there has to be an assurance of safety. And so there's an emergency use listing. There's a kind of global mechanism that will allow the WHO to be able to review, the safety profile, the efficacy of the vaccines, and all of that, and accept it as being safe and efficacious enough to be distributed globally. So that is one aspect of it. But there also has to be a regulatory mechanism happening at the country level. It's very important that there is also emergency use regulation or a process in which there's marketing authorization, meaning that it is actually legally allowed to be used in the country, right? Because it's important to note that the liability for these new vaccines will lie on the countries themselves, right? And so therefore it's important that there is surveillance in terms of adverse events to ensure safety of these vaccines in the country.
So if I could just add too, that the 3 vaccines that you have seen moving forward have been providing their information to WHO, just as they have provided to their the regulatory body in the UK, which have given emergency use licensing recently, as well as the FDA in the US. So that this is going to happen. The manufacturers have to present their data, all the data they have to, both, as Edwin mentioned, the safety and the responses. And this will guide. And there are committees, the WHO have a committee that would look at that data as well, in terms of giving the guidance as to whether or not it can be approved for emergency use as well.
So it is taking place simultaneously.
Yeah, everything is moving quickly. COVID is one of the fastest, the responses to COVID has been the fastest since, I think, in modern medicine, ever.
I'm so glad you said that. I'm so glad you said that, because that's also where we start to see some of the skepticism coming from the public, when they look at the rapid speed. How do you respond to the safety of treatment or vaccines that come as a result of this global initiative or this collaboration, given the fact that we are accustomed to a much longer wait to be able to get to the point of vaccine approval?
Okay, one of the things, and I'll start here, is that these regulatory agencies are adhering to their principles. I feel comforted by that, I will tell you. They are waiting on the science and the safety data. Of course, you look and see the emergency needs as well, but that's not being compromised in terms of full licensing of that data. There are, in terms of clinical trials, you have a group of persons who are not part of the manufacturers or the scientists who are developing it, who are called the Data Safety and Monitoring Board, and they would review the data independently of them, so that you get a sense of security, if I should use that word, that what is happening is real. I think what in the past we went very slow. We went slow, sometimes 10 years to develop things. But because of the impact of COVID in the world, we do need to get out of the current state. And the vaccines one of these steps. Also, the science has advanced. We have methods and approaches to vaccines that are different now than a few years ago. So all of that has moved things faster. But I do believe the regulatory authorities are adhering to their principles, and this is what we need to be comforted by.
So let's put the three most discussed vaccines into perspective, and what the realistic possibilities are of when or how this Belize and the region would get access to these vaccines. Which ones are you monitoring, for example, most closely?
We all. You have to monitor everything.
Yeah.
You have to monitor everything, and you have to look to understand the science. But it's not only that. There are others that are coming up. But in December we would have a few more that would have information that they can present as well.
Yeah.
So we need to look at all, but also, so we hope. Let's say there's a hope that within the first half of 2021, vaccines will be available to begin distribution. But there are really a lot more steps that we need to take pay attention to in terms of the delivery systems. So having the vaccine is just the beginning. The second step, it is what we call the deployment. And as you said, with the deployment, PAHO, well, it's really WHO guidance. WHO with the consortium have a guidance document in how countries can prepare for that. Because, and I would ask Edwin to continue, because this is part of what he's doing right now, and it is related to the health system.
Okay.
So Edwin, if we can continue, yes.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Jack. As Dr. Jack mentioned, there's a whole guidance on the deployment of the new COVID-19 vaccines. And within the context of, again, health system strengthening, what we're trying to do here is also strengthen the health system delivery of immunizations, of vaccines here. So one consideration, that's why we're really closely following the updates in terms of these vaccines. For example, Pfizer, the vaccines needs ultra cold chain.
Yeah.
The country has to have these huge freezers, these walk-in freezers, and the whole cold chain from the time they arrive at the airport to the vaccine storage areas, down to the districts, and down to the delivery sites.
Yeah.
And of course, we're in the process actually of supporting the country right now in terms of, one, doing the inventory of existing cold chain equipment, and two, also identifying what the needs are, what needs to be purchased at this time, because they have to be ready. Whatever vaccines we get, whether they need ultra cold chain or not, or the usual temperatures that we're getting for the rest of the vaccines, we need to be ready for them.
Yeah.
So that right now we're in the process of doing that. But cold chain is just one of the things that we need to look at.
Yeah.
The other areas would be coordination. Everyone has a role to play, and there has to be certain committees. Right now, we're working with the technical working group from the Ministry of Health, and within Ministry of Health, there has to be coordination between the regulatory unit. The communications unit is also very important in terms of demand creation and also for risk communication. We also have to work with other units regarding surveillance, to ensure that while the vaccines are being given out, that, if there are any adverse events, that they're being picked up by the system. And also the delivery, transportation, for example, vehicles, and also determining whether, depending on the type of vaccine and depending also on your target population, whether you're going to be doing it at fixed sites, you're going to be doing it out through outreach, you go house to house, depending again on your target population. For example, if it's the elderly, how do you reach the elderly?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we've seen some of these considerations in the UK already, whether or not where if the vaccines that we do get are going to require special refrigeration below, beyond what you can be able to typically.
Minus 70, minus 80.
Yeah,
yes,
minus 80, thank you. So, I mean, this is specialized equipment that most likely would have to be kept in a central area. But there are differences in how they're kept when you're talking about the Pfizer, the Moderna, and the Oxford vaccines that are, the ones that seem to be most promising at this point. And there's a difference in cost. How do we take a look at that one too?
Okay, but again, that will be part of that COVAX facility. In terms of looking at what is the best cost and what is the best cost that is identified through pool procurement, and that's the benefit of a COVAX facility, because instead of trying to negotiate on your own and get a higher price, a pool procurement mechanism with a large pool can get a better price.
The bigger the order, the better the price.
The bigger the order, the better the price.
Yeah.
It happens even in health.
Yeah.
So that is something, and that's why we encourage, and we're really encouraging the countries to also lobby and also participate in this COVAX facility instead of negotiating independently, because that will drive prices up.
Yeah.
So this is it. The solidarity it also includes working together and being part of this, not only the distribution, but also the participation in the COVAX facility.
Yeah. And going back to the issue of the ultra cold temperatures, for example, the Oxford vaccine doesn't require that type of storage. That's regular refrigeration.
Yes, and it's like many of the other vaccines we have. So it's just one set that might need this ultra cold, but independent of that, we always maintain cold chain.
Yes.
Because, it's just what is the level that you're speaking of in the context of these vaccines that require storage at the minus 70, minus 80. But I want to say that they're also developing special containers for moving them through countries and spaces. So that is also happening in addition to the storage, but in terms of its distribution and moving from one part of the country to the next, special containers are being also developed.
So
yes.
Help us all understand. We watch the international news with a great sigh of relief when we hear of rollouts of vaccines in the United States, in the United Kingdom, as early as this month or next month, and we feel, okay, we may be next. How realistic is that view? And I mean next as in within the next month.
I think all of this will take a while. I mean, I'm going to be cautious and say by mid 2021, because the hope is to deploy, as I mentioned at the beginning, to all the 2 billion doses by the end of 2021. This is through the COVAX facility, but I'm speaking globally at this point. But so I think realistically, we're going to see the beginnings by June 2021. It may be earlier, but I'm being a bit cautious here because it takes a lot. It takes human resources, it takes people, it takes the distribution. And at the same time, and something we should not forget, is that we do not want to compromise the existing programs on immunization, which need to continue. Those around the childhood immunization illnesses, the HPV vaccines, we want these things to continue. So you do not want to pull from the existing programs for this program. And hence there is that balance and realistic, and then we can only do it in a phased way. Because you're going to have your first phase and the countries need to identify what's their priority group.
Yes.
the frontline workers and the healthcare staff, and who's a frontline worker.
Yes. Yeah.
And the next is also, of course, the elderly and those who are vulnerable. And that's, you see it in different.
What's the advice? Is there a recommendation? Are there recommendations from WHO as to who should get the vaccine first?
We do have recommendations, and it's in keeping with what you're seeing and the discussions that you're hearing. Yeah.
Okay. And what happens when, let's move all the way forward to the time when we do have access to the vaccine? It will only be for a small percentage of the population. What do you envision would be the situation for the wider public when there is partial vaccination coverage of vulnerable groups?
Okay. So, Edwin, if you wanted, but I can continue as well.
First of all, the projected first tranche is just 3% of the population. Belize has attempted to cover 30%, so it will come in tranches. So what happens to the rest of the population?
So the first tranche that we get in Belize will only be for 3% of our population.
Yes, that's across country.
Okay.
And then, so therefore you need to prioritize who it goes to first. And then the remaining 27% will also be, we're not sure yet, it could come in several tranches as well, but we know that the first 3% is going to be the first deployment. And so we have to plan for that, because even with the cold chain and all of that, we need to know how much will be stored and will be mobilized. But the other thing that we also need to remember here, before the rest, right, that we do not stop all the public health interventions. The social distancing will have to continue. Hand washing, all the other public health interventions will have to continue, because we're not going to reach herd immunity yet at this time. Absolutely. It will help dampen the transmission, but we're not going to reach that point of herd immunity yet, where there's enough coverage in the country that the transmission will be stopped. So it should not give us a false sense. I think this is a warning, of the precaution that, it's a very important point to say that not because the vaccine is here and will only be covering a certain percentage, maybe the more vulnerable ones, the rest of the population cannot be lax or, cannot be complacent. We still need to continue all of the public health measures to contain the transmission. Thank you.
And the global plea, because I think we watch what is happening, and we wonder. Naturally, I think some countries want to protect their people first. What is the negotiation or the lobbying that takes place on the international realm that the wealthier countries will in fact ensure that there is coverage globally before they provide their 100% coverage in their respective countries?
So some of this could only be encouraged, but I would tell you that there are opportunities through what we call our governing bodies, the governing bodies of both WHO and PAHO, in which there's the discussion about things like this in terms of, and part of the global solidarity, the discussions, And so that's why you have so many countries that have participated in this COVAX facility as well. And knowing that we, as the Director General of WHO says, we're not safe. None of us are safe until all of us are safe. So if you use that vision, then you will get that sort of solidarity and discussion. Of course, countries can be part of that discussion, but also may still continue, of course, with providing for their country, and that you understand as well. So it is a balance, but there are opportunities where the discussion at a global situations, in meetings, in various events and guidance that will encourage countries to also see that they also need to have all countries and have access to these vaccines as well.
All right. Well, we do appreciate you putting the vaccine progress into perspective for us this morning. What's your final advice to our viewers who, I think like everyone else around the globe, we are getting very optimistic about the news we hear with vaccines. What's your advice to them at this time?
So I would say that we're happy to see the progress. It is excellent. It is unprecedented, the speed at which you, as I said before. But we do need to also be realistic because I sometimes tell my nieces and nephews and my son that we need to wear masks for a long time. And this goes into 2022 or beyond until we have significant amount of people vaccinated. And therefore, please have some patience and please cooperate, this is true. And just because the vaccine is here does not mean that we can change many of the other prevention interventions that already exist for COVID-19.
All right. Well, thank you very much. We appreciate you weighing in on this conversation this morning and helping us understand the intricacies of the negotiations that are ongoing. Stay safe.
Okay. Thank you too.
All right.
Thank you very much for having us.
All right.
Thank you. And with that, we are going to go ahead and take a break.
And when we come back, it is for our conversation with the United States Embassy as they unveil a Know the Science campaign.
This COVID update was brought to you by Fulltech Systems, your technology center, where you'll come for the price, but stay for the service.